Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm going to continue with our lecture from last time, speaking about the meanings of the forms of the Arabic noun and verb. Now, this is really the heart of the Arabic language. We have spoken about the metaphysical hierarchy, the cosmological diagram of the Arabic language, how letters, the archetypes of God, how the breath of God itself diffuses into all the cosmic forms and shapes, how the letters become words according to these mathematical structures. These are the abniyah, your mabani, your structures of the Arabic language. Just to quickly remind us, we had this deep idea that every letter is a presence of meaning, right? Alif, lam, mim. The letter itself is like a spirit, an archetypal meaning beyond what we can conceive, an unfathomable, infinite presence of meaning. Every letter is divine. The letters are names of God in a very deep sense. They all belong unto God. They are the breath of God. But the letters take the forms, they are sat upon thrones. Right, the arsh. What is the arsh of God? Of course, not a physical thing. It's completely beyond something physical, something beyond what we can conceive. But the arsh of God is the most fundamental structure in which the presence of God is established. Right, you might read a translation like God sat on the throne. That is to say that the presence of God is established upon this mathematical structure, which is called the throne. There is not just an arsh, there are urush. You might be familiar that there is not just a Kaaba, there are Ka'abat. There is the Kaaba, the holy Kaaba in Mecca. This is the earthly Kaaba. But on every plane of existence, in every heaven from the seven heavens, there is a Kaaba. There is this axis. This is to understand cosmology and how the universe is formed. Very similarly, there are urush, right? Thrones. There is a throne at every plane of existence. Everything has a throne. In fact, the human body has it, or the human spirit. Our ruh has an arsh. Whatever God says is true for himself is true for everything at its level of being. It's a mirror image. خَلَقَ اللَّهُ آدَمَ عَلَى صُورَتِهِ. God created Adam in his image, in his surah form. That is to say that all the meanings of God are microcosmically contained in the human being. That all the names of God have an image inside of the human being. So this is the cosmological picture that we have of the Arabic language. You have spirits, which are letters, established upon the thrones, which are these forms. The forms of nouns and verbs are principal. Now I want to just quickly go through essentially the most common forms of nouns. What you need to be most familiar with is that, first and foremost, the first noun you'll most likely encounter is the verbal noun. In Arabic, this is called the masdar. There's a bit of lag, so please to bear with me as I write. But the masdar comes from the verb sadara. And sadara means to emerge. The masdar literally means the ground from which something emerges. The root, the source. It's very aptly named because the word, like this verbal noun itself, is the ground from which all these other forms are derived. So you learn a root letter. You learn, for example, fa'ala, the root. The verb is fa'ala. Fi'l is the masdar. That's the first noun you learn. There are a few common forms of the masdar. At the beginning, you just need to memorize this, but there are patterns, and eventually you will start to naturally feel the patterns out. You'll get to a stage where you can kind of intuitively know what the masdar is just by hearing it. But it takes time and work. There's no getting around that. Of course, fi'l, what is the pattern? It's here, right? The masdar can be fi'l, fa'al, or fu'l. Fi'lun, fa'alun, fu'lun. Something like fi'l. The vowel here actually does make a difference, but I won't go into it right at the moment. This is the first form of verbal noun. Second, very, very common form is fu'ul. Fu'ul. For example, huduth, thubut, julus, sitting, happening. Usually anything to do with some type of state, rather than a singular occurrence, is usually on this pattern over here, fu'ul. You have fa'al. You might notice this pattern. I'll give you two most common verbs, jamal and jalal. Jamal means majesty, or sorry, Jamal means beauty. You might have heard of the names of Jamal, Sifatul Jamal, wa Sifatul Jalal. Some understand this as kind of the masculine names and the feminine names. For example, Rahmah. God is Ar-Rahman. The attribute of Rahmah is from Al-Jamal, from beauty. Whereas God is Al-Azim, He is sublime, the powerful, the almighty. This sifa, this attribute of Azama, is from the attributes of Jalal. We might translate this as beauty and sublimity. Jamal and Jalal. So it's on a pattern Fa'al. Another very common, or two very common patterns are Fa'ala and Fu'ula. These patterns occur usually when you have a verb representing an abstract quality. Well, that is, abstract qualities occur on this pattern. For example, buruda. Buruda is coldness. Harara. Fa'ala is hotness. Al-har. Har is heat. Harara is hotness. Observe the difference, right? Har is on this pattern. It will be fa'alun. The root is har, will be harun, right? And then the sukun letter becomes merged and becomes mushaddada. But harara is on this pattern of an abstract quality. If you just memorize these things over here, that will serve you well. Fa'alun, fa'alun, fi'l, you just think fi'lun, fa'ul. You have fa'al and you might see fi'al. There's a slight difference between the two, but it will come. You have fa'ala and fi'ala. Again, there's a difference. In fact, I'm happy to say fi'ala is about... In fact, I'll give you loads of examples. Fi'ala, you have ri'asa or riyasa. Riyasa means leadership. Siyada, from Sayyid. Siyada, another word for masterhood or leadership again. There is a khilafa, which everyone is aware of what a khilafa means. The idea of vicegerency, successorship. You have wilaya. Wilaya. That is an idea of succession and being entrusted with the affair of something. So perhaps you spot the pattern. It's to do with some type of authority, some type of post, some type of mansab, if you've heard of that word, or wadifa. Whenever there is a function, some wadifa, that is what fi'ala usually connotes. So do you see that the patterns actually have a meaning? Every pattern has a meaning. One great word to illustrate this is actually wilaya and walaya. Fi'ala and fa'ala. Fi'ala, right, some type of function, that is wilaya. It is a function of being a successor, being entrusted, being a wali. A wali in the sense of yatawalla al-amr, right? He has taken charge of the affair. That is wilaya. Of course, in spiritual meaning is sainthood. But then you have walaya. They're not the same word. People make a mistake here. Walaya is on the pattern fa'ala. See if you can remember what that means. Remember we said that fa'ala is an abstract quality. Walaya is friendship. Wilaya, right? Some type of authority. Walaya, intimacy, closeness, friendship. It's a very subtle beauty of the Arabic language. And fu'ula is just an abstract quality, like rutuba. Rutuba is wetness, being ratbun, being wet or moist, and many, many other similar things. So these are the most common forms of nouns. You don't need to memorize them at this stage, but just be familiar with them, at least have a reference of them, and be able to come back to them as we encounter words, and I can therefore call your mind back to such a form and see if you remember. I might have mentioned this last time, but let's take on the pattern fa'lun, you have mashyun, right? Mashyun. This is from the verb masha yamshi. Mashyun means walking. It is the masdar of masha, to walk. It is walking, mashyun. Mashyatun is one walk. It is a particular walk. Mashyatun refers to a walk that someone has done. Mishya, right, making the fatha kasra, mishya is the way in which one walks. Notice what a difference the change in vowel makes. Similar to here, fa'ala and fi'ala. This is very, very common in Arabic language. We're going to see this. So when you learn verbs or learn words in general, pay particular importance to the actual vowels on it. This knowledge will help you remember that. Because having learned the forms, well, you should recognize that, it is fu'ula, not fi'ula or fa'ula. So that's the easiest example of that. We can take your masdar, and I can speak about one particular happening. In fact, marra. Marra yumurru is a verb which means to pass by. Marrun means passing. This is the masdar. Then I form fa'latun. Marratun. Marratun is a particular passing by. Hence marra, one time. And the other important nouns are going to be the participles. Ya fa'il and maf'ul. We're going to see this many, many times. Fa'il, the active participle. Maf'ul, the passive participle. For the derived verbs, that is for the forms of the verbs, which we'll go through in a bit, the fa'il is formed a bit differently. In fact, I'll just show it here. When you have fa'ala, the active participle is fa'il. Well, what about the form, for example, fa'ala, over here? What about this, fa'ala? The fa'il should be different, right? It should have a different participle. How do we form that? Well, there's actually a very easy way. You just you put a meme at the beginning, and it's going to be with a kasra. Mufa'il. Mufa'il. Tafa'ala, mutafa'il. Af'ala, مفعل. فعل مفاعل. To make it passive, the passive participle usually is maf'ul. That becomes mufa'al. You change the il to an al. So it becomes mufa'al, mufa'al, mutafa'al, muf'al. Simple as that. Something else to be aware of is what is called the locative noun. That is location. The noun which tells us the place of something. Maf'al, right? Like masjid. Sajada means to bow down. Masjid is the place of bowing. Gharaba means to set. Maghrib is the place of setting. Or it can also mean the time of setting, place or time. Hence, Salatul Maghrib, the prayer which takes place when the sun has set. Maghrib. Maghrib, the place, it is the west, the place where the sun sets, the west. Mashriq, the place of shuruq, sharaqa, the rising of the sun. You might have heard of the word miftah on the form mif'al. Can also describe the instrument by which something is done. So again, I appreciate these are many things to have been encountered. I don't appreciate, or I don't expect you to necessarily memorize all this immediately. At some stage you should, but if this is your first time seeing it, just be familiar. Just spend time familiarizing yourself, being aware that these exist, and allowing yourself to see many, many examples through going through a text and actually practicing out of it. And afterwards, it will come very naturally and easily, inshallah. I didn't write this, perhaps I should have, but then you have some other derived, really adjectives. I can derive other adjectives. Okay, the pen is not working that well today. I'll make another video about this, but you have two things. One is called one is the ismul mubalagha, and the other is a sifatun mushabbaha. In very short, there are certain forms. One very, very common one is fa'il. That is another form on which a noun can be derived. In fact, I might ask you right now in your mind, think of a word which rhymes with fa'il. One word which comes immediately is, in fact, so many of the names of God rhyme with fa'il. Rahim, Azim, Kabir. Many of them do. Fa'il, Jamil, Jalil, Majid, Hamid. You should notice this. Next time you read the Quran, see how many words are on this pattern. Another form is fa'al. Now this is from the Asma'ul Mubalagha. Fa'al is a very particular meaning, but for now, let's say it's a more intensive way of saying the fa'il. Right, there's this form which is fa'il, the doer of the word. For example, ghafir. Ghafara means to forgive. God is ghafir. Ghafir al-dhanb. Ghafir. He forgives. Ghaffar. Fa'al is a more intensive form. Fa'il is the one who does the fi'l. Ghafir is the one who does maghfirah, who forgives. Ghaffar is the one who forgives again and again and again. And you can hear it in the form, right? Fa'al. There's a repetition of the ayn. That repetition of the ayn symbolizes the repetition of the action. Ghaffar, again and again doing maghfirah. Infinitely many times. Al-Ghaffar. Now, do you know any other verbs or names of God derived from maghfirah? Hopefully you recognize the other one, which is Al-Ghafur. Al-Ghaffar and Al-Ghafur. Al-Ghafur is on another pattern, fa'ul. Now this again is a more intensive version of fa'il. But this time, whereas fa'al is about the repetition of the action, the infinite repetition of the action. Try to guess in your mind, what does fa'ul do to the verb? Fa'al, fa'ul, ghafur. Whereas al-Ghaffar is the one who forgives infinitely many times. Al-Ghafur is the all-forgiving, the one who will forgive anything. No matter what it is, it will be forgiven. It symbolizes the infinite, all-embracing Al-Ghafur, the all-embracing nature of that attribute. Similar with Fa'lan, Ar-Rahman. It's Ar-Rahim, the one who always is merciful, forever and ever. But Ar-Rahman, the one whose mercy is utterly limitless, limitless, unbounded, infinite love. You can feel it in the grand nature of this noun, Ar-Rahman. There's a greatness in how it is spoken. So that's a quick introduction to nouns. Again, we need to go into more detail to go through every single verb, every single word form. But in fact, one of the best ways to actually learn this is by studying the names of God. You can study the names of God and you can learn all of these nouns and verbs. And inshallah, we will do that in the future. It's in fact one of the best, my favorite ways to teach Arabic vocabulary is doing precisely that, going through the names of God. That's all of the nouns. Let's quickly go through the verbs. So we begin with our basic form, fa'ala. Recall that it can be either active or passive. Fa'ala, to do, he did it. Fu'ila, it was done. For example, nasara is to help, to assist, to come to the aid of. Nasarahu, nasara, he helped. Nusira, he was helped. Now this form, fa'ala, it can actually have different subforms, depending upon the vowels. Two, there's a mistake, there should be fa'ula. Fa'ula is, for example, jamula, hasuna, yahsunu. Is to be the thing. Fa'ula is the deepest meaning. It is not saying that it just became the thing, or it happened. Fa'ula, right, there's the oo sound. The dhamma is very powerful. Remember the nominative, right? The rafa, marfu' case, the nominative case of the subject, of the subject of the sentence, the subject of the verb. It is dhamma. Dhamma is very powerful, the oo sound. Fa'ula, hasuna, he is beautiful. He is beautiful. Something intrinsic to the nature of the thing. You have fa'ila, yaf'alu, alima, alima ya'lamu. It is an internal action, something which is intrinsic to the being, but which is done sometimes. We don't always know, but when we do, the capacity, the potential is always there. Ilm is some intrinsic attribute of the human being, and sometimes it is activated, like sam' as well, hearing. Sami'a, sami'tuhu, alimtuhu, something very deep inside of you. There's a few others, but I won't go into them. For example, fa'ala yaf'ilu, daraba yadribu. That has the meaning of overcoming. When one thing overcomes the other, when there's one verb which is some type of activity of one thing going over the other, that's usually on this form, fa'ala yaf'ilu, daraba yadribu, ghalaba yaghlibu, and many others. The middle form, we have spoken about the middle voice. The middle form, where it is both the subject and the object, is of the form ifta'ala. What I want you to note, and this might seem a bit confusing, is that any one of these forms can be active and passive. So in fact, you can form the middle active and the middle passive. Ifta'ala and uftu'ila. This might sound a bit confusing, and it's easiest to see it in action in an example before making sense of it. But just be aware of that for now. Here's the middle form, اغتسل. He washed himself. غسل to wash, اغتسل to wash oneself. The inchoative form is when, I'll give an example. كسر means to break. كسر, he broke it. كسر, it was broken. كسرت الكأس. The glass was broken. كسرت. انكسرت. The glass broke. What is the difference if I say the glass was broken, or if I say the glass broke? What is the difference? Right? If I say the glass was broken, it means someone broke it. But if I say the glass broke, it is very feasible that the glass broke on its own accord. Happens for reasons of temperature sometimes, it just explodes, it breaks. In and of itself, it originates from itself, it happens to itself. In kasara. That is this meaning. In fa'ala. It's the meaning happening inside of the thing itself. Quite a common form. The multiplicative form is where I say multiplicative because think of a multiplying table, like a rectangle. In a rectangle, you have the height and you have the base. You have the length. And the idea is, for example, 2 times 6 is I have 6 twos. I have 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. I'm multiplying the meaning of the verb. I keep doing the fi'l many times. Or I try to make the fi'l occur in time. Another way to think of it is that the entire fi'l is happening over a period of time. One slightly morbid example which is given, that we should change it. I can't think of something immediately. Well, qatala means to kill. Qatala, fa'ala means to fight. The end result of fighting is death, to kill. But qatala is the process and time of it happening, to fight. Qatala, the actual thing which occurs in time. And a nicer one, perhaps, is sawa, to equal something. Because to equal something is some process of equaling. Or khalafa, to differ from something. It's a process occurring in time, for multiplication. We can form the middle form of that. That's tafa'ala. That's where there is usually some notion of harmony. For example, sawa, one thing equals another, but that thing also equals the other thing. Two things, sawa and this sawa, that is tasawi. Tasawa, both of them together, tasawaya, are both equal to each other. An idea of communal harmony, both of the things doing the sawa to each other, the fa'ala to each other, that is tafa'ul. The continuous form. This is nazala means to go down. Nazzala means to make go down in stages, gradually. Fataha means to open. Fattaha means to make open, but again in stages. To open it up bit by bit. To do it bit by bit, that is fa'ala. The middle form of that is tafa'ala. Fattaha, to open something bit by bit. Tafattaha. The thing opened itself out bit by bit. Not futtiha. The passive of this is futtiha. That means it was opened up bit by bit. Tafattaha means that the thing itself, from itself, opened up bit by bit. Allama is to teach. Ullima is a passive, to have been taught. Ta'allama is to have taught oneself, i.e. to have learned. And actually, it's very profound that in the Arabic language, the word for learning literally means teaching oneself. There's wisdom here to be meditated upon. Last, af'ala, that is where we are generating the meaning of the verb. For example, I like to give bulk. Bulk is light, it is luminosity. Af'ala, the root is adwa'a, but that becomes ada'a. Ada'a means to give bulk, to generate bulk. Adlama, to generate dhulma, to generate darkness. Af'ala means it's like literally generating that thing, doing it. Anzala, to generate the meaning of nuzul, i.e. to make it go down. And I like to contrast anzala to nazzala. They both mean do nuzul, but anzala is one step. Anzaltuhu. Nazzala is nazzaltuhu. That's why in the Quran we see inzal, anzala, and we see tanzil, nazzala. Now I haven't gone through the masadir, the verbal nouns of each one. Ifta'ala yafta'ilu ifti'al, infa'ala yanfa'ilu infi'al. Really, perhaps the ones you might recognize are mufa'ala. You might recognize taf'il in particular. Fa'ala yufa'ilu taf'il. Tanzil. Nazzala yunazzilu tanzil. That is what it means. Tanazzala yatanazzalu tanazzul. Aslama yuslimu Islam. Islam is the master of this verb. And I remember when I was learning these things, it really blew my mind. That we all know, I know what the word Islam is, but now I know the real meaning at a deep level. It is the master of Aslama. So hopefully there should be a level of excitement, of ecstasy learning this, like your mind is opening, the Quran is opening, just by learning these verbs, by learning these forms. So much of the Quran, really the entire Quran, to tell the truth, becomes accessible. All you need to do is learn what the letters mean. Do you know what the letters mean? You know what the forms are? With these two things together, 1 + 1 is 2, you have mastered all of Arabic. You have mastered all of Arabic with these two things. Last form, my favorite form, but probably the hardest to also get your head around. I do appreciate it. I've said that a few times. Not to say this is difficult. It is not difficult, but it is subtle. Learn this difference. It's not complex. It's mathematical. It's not arbitrary. These are not arbitrary rules. I can promise you right here, right now, and come to me and argue with me and shout in my face if you need to, if I'm wrong. The Arabic language has no irregularities. Anyone who tells you that there's an irregularity, I challenge them right now. That they are speaking the mistruth. There are no irregularities in Arabic language. I have not come across a single irregularity. There is a meaning to everything. I even have one in my mind right now. The only irregularity I can think of is ikhal, ikhalu. There's one verb which is khala, yakhalu, but when instead of akhalu, it is ikhalu. Even that has a meaning. That has a meaning. So I'm just saying that in case someone tries to be clever and calls me out. I know the so-called exceptions, and I guarantee you that they are not exceptions. There are no exceptions to the rules. Everything has a rule. So it's not complex, it is subtle though, and it requires deep concentration and practice. Deep concentration and effort. But the last form is the middle of the generative. In fact, I'm not even going to tell you what it is. I want you to go through my previous videos, learn what the middle form is. I've told you what the generative form is. Now explain in the comments what you think this form is. And it's not talab. Just to put that out there. Many books, they say that istif'al means talab. Istansara means he sought out nasr. Istaghfara means he sought out maghfirah. That is wrong. It is a meaning of istaf'ala, but it is not the meaning. So this is maybe there's a prize. I'll give a prize to anyone who can figure out what the correct meaning of istaf'ala is. Otherwise, I won't give these examples now, but this is another exercise. Take ilm. Take this root ilm. In fact, I'm going to give everyone an exercise now. Let's make it interesting to begin with. There are actually two verbs. Everyone knows the verb alima, which means to know. There is another one, it is alama. The masdar of alima is ilm. This is knowledge. I want someone to research what does this mean, alama. The masdar of this is alm. Right, ilm, almun, or alam. One of these two. Almun or alamun. In particular, ilm is knowledge, alam is a sign. What is the relationship between knowledge, knowing something, and a sign, a marking, a symbol? Furthermore, go through each of these forms I have listed out and tell me, what forms does ilm fall into? So you would have, well, in fact, you have aluma. That's another form, actually. Let's make this even more interesting. There's three verbs. Aluma. What does aluma mean? Alima, alama. How many of these forms does it have? Right, there's three there. I'talama. Does that exist? In alama. Does that exist? Alama, ta'alama, allama. Of course, we know that. Ta'lim, ta'allama, ta'allum, a'lama, i'lam, ista'lama, isti'lam. How many of these, or what is the meaning of each one? Actually, as far as I know, every single one exists, apart from maybe one. There's only one I have never heard before. Every single other form I just said exists. So perhaps this also gives a taste of how utterly vast and comprehensive the Arabic language is. I've given a few hard exercises, which I'm very excited to see if anyone can work on and solve. Otherwise, maybe I'll speak about the other examples later. In fact, do the same thing. For ilm, do the same thing for fath and nazl, nuzul. How many of the forms exist and what is their meaning? Otherwise, I shall see everyone in the next video. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.